What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. One of the most controversial paintings ever reveals about centuries of blood rage and pain. You've probably seen it before, and if you have, you know it's impossible to forget. Its presence on the wall in shows like Daredevil, Born Again are reminders of the pervasiveness of violence, rage and power. With the moniker Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan, there's some mystery behind the actual painting that Russian artist Ilya Repin put on the canvas. Once you see the scene, it's clear that there's a story of pain, violence, and loss at its core. But the truth is, there are two different stories told through the visual medium. Repin painted Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan about 300 years after the events depicted in the painting even took place. The death of the Tsar's son in 1581 was a momentous event in Russian history. But so were the goings-on that the artist experienced amid the tumultuous 1880s in Russia. As a result, the painting doesn't just evoke one tragic chapter of Russian history, it speaks to several chapters. Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan is about the Russian heir's death as well as the historic events that the artist himself witnessed, with vivid colors, striking imagery, and emotion woven into every brush stroke. In 1581, Ivan killed his heir apparent. Ivan the Terrible, as he became known, was the first Tsar of Russia. Born Ivan Chetverty Vasilyevich in 1530, Ivan was next in line to hold power in the Grand Duchy of Muscovy. After the death of his father Vasily III in 1533, his mother Yelena Glinskaya served as regent until her death 5 years later, and until 1547, Ivan was in the care of nobles vying for power. After Ivan was crowned Ivan IV, he reformed the church and the military in Russia. In 1547, he also tied the knot with Anastasia Romanovna, his first wife. She gave birth to one son and 2 daughters, all of whom passed away young. In 1554, the birth of Ivan Ivanovich secured an heir for the Tsar, with another son, Feofor, born in 1557. At this point in his life, Ivan was prone to violent rages and paranoia. But when Anastasia died in 1560, he lost the one person historians believed could control Ivan's moods. Ivan got married again and had more kids, but his violent tendencies quickly showed up in what became known as a reign of terror. It was amid this that Ivan purportedly killed his own son in 1581. There's no definitive evidence about why and how Ivan killed his son. There's no solid evidence as to what happened between Ivan the Terrible and his son, Tsarevich Ivan. Among the most common versions of the story is that the Tsar saw his daughter-in-law, Elena Sheremeteva, was once lying on a bench, dressed in her underdress, since she was pregnant and did not think that anyone would come in to see her. She was likely wearing one of the 3 dresses women were supposed to wear. She still could be considered inappropriate, which could be the reason that when the Tsar saw her he struck her in the face and then beat her so much with his staff which he had with him, that the next night she miscarried the boy. At this time, Ivan's son ran to his father and began to ask him not to beat his wife, but this only drew his father's anger and blows upon himself. He was very seriously wounded in the head, almost in the temple, with this same staff. This account from the 16th century continued. Having wounded his son, the father immediately gave in to deep grief and immediately called doctors from Moscow and Andrei Shelkolov with Nikita Romanovich, so as to have everything at hand. The son passed away on the 5th day, and amid widespread sorrow, he was moved to Moscow. There are different accounts of what happened, but most of them involve father and son getting into some kind of argument. Regardless, the younger Ivan was struck in the head and died several days later from his wounds on November 19, 1581. The death of Tsar Alexander II also influenced the painting. Ilya Repin painted Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan during the early 1880s. Tsar Alexander II was killed in St. Petersburg, Russia, in 1881. In his memoirs, Repin wrote, "Sometime in Moscow in 1881, I heard a new piece by Rimsky-Korsakov, The Sweetness of Vengeance. I was taken over by these sounds, and I wondered if I could paint the mood and effect that the music had on me. I thought back to Tsar Ivan. The death of Alexander II signaled a shift back to more conservatism in Russia. Alexander II had freed the serfs in 1861, established districts to have local councils, and restricted the power of nobles in Russia. This was all in jeopardy, and, when Alexander III became Tsar, much of it was ultimately undone. Inspired by the musical composition amid the turbulent events of his life, Repin began painting the event that had taken place some 300 years earlier. He worked on the painting for years, and at various points during the process, he came to view it as both a disappointment and a thrill. In 1885, when he had completed it, it was displayed in St. Petersburg. Repin's painting was immediately controversial. In his memoir, the artist Ilya Repin stated that he was thinking about Russian history and needed a way to express the agonizing tragedies of our time. My feelings were too heavy for the horrors of our times. As a result, the ongoing conflict between rulers and the people mirrored how he painted Ivan and his heir. This may be why Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan doesn't feature a father and his dead son, but rather shows a father and his dying son. Historians and other commentators on the piece note that the painting represents the tension between the two, and how one act made in a state of rage can lead to irreparable damage. As a result, the work received mixed reviews from Repin's peers at the time. Tolstoy, who Repin had come to know, wrote that the artist's Ivan IV is the most vile and pathetic murderer, as they should be, and the beautiful mortal beauty of the sun. Good, very good. He said it quite clearly. Moreover, so masterfully that the craftsmanship is not visible. Goodbye, and may God bless you. Take it deeper and deeper. After receiving word of complaints about the painting and not understanding it himself, Tsar Alexander III ordered it not be allowed to be exhibited and, in general, not to be allowed to be distributed to the public by any other means. The painting was again put on display years later, only to be slashed by a man with a knife 3 times in 1913. Repin restored it before he passed away in 1930, but it was damaged again in 2018 by a man who struck several blows with a metal security pole against the glassed canvas. It had been ripped in 3 places, according to reports at the time. The attacker stated, "I came to see the painting. I wanted to go to the canteen when I arrived at 8 in the evening. I drank 100 grams of vodka. I was overwhelmed by vodka, which I do not consume." One of the most controversial paintings in history, Ilya Repin's Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan on November 16, 1581, continues to evoke visceral reactions more than a century after it was first exhibited. You've probably seen it before, either in textbooks, documentaries, or unexpectedly in a pop culture setting like Netflix's Daredevil, Born Again. The painting will never be forgotten. With wide, terrified eyes, Ivan IV of Russia, known to the world as Ivan the Terrible, cradles the limp, bleeding body of his dying son, his hand pressed desperately against the wound he inflicted himself. The composition, drenched in red hues, emotional agony, and brutal realism, transcends time, conjuring not just the historical incident of filicide, but a broader meditation on power, rage, loss, and the destructive force of ungovernable violence. However, just like the historical event it depicts, this painting is layered with myth, politics, and generational trauma. Ilya Repin painted this work in 1885, nearly 300 years after the fatal altercation it depicts supposedly took place. The subject was Ivan IV, Russia's first Tsar, who ruled from 1547 to 1584, and earned his terrifying moniker through a reign characterized by paranoia, purges, and relentless cruelty. According to some accounts, Ivan struck his son Ivan Ivanovich in a fit of rage, allegedly because of a perceived insult or perhaps due to fury over the attire of the younger Ivan's pregnant wife, Elena Sheremeteva. The story goes that Tsar Ivan killed his son by striking him in the head with his staff, regardless of the cause. Historians debate the veracity of this tale, largely sourced from foreign accounts, such as that of Antonio Posavino, a papal legate. Nevertheless, Repin's painting makes that ambiguity irrelevant. He portrays the aftermath with such heartbreaking humanity that we are forced to consider what it means to be both a monster and a man. Repin, a leading figure of the Peredvishniki, the Wanderers movement in Russia, was no stranger to the idea of art as political and psychological commentary. His works often examined social realities and historical episodes to critique or reflect on the conditions of his own time. Russia was once again in turmoil when Repin painted Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan. Just 4 years earlier, Tsar Alexander II had been assassinated in a bombing by a revolutionary group. His death marked a turning point in Russian society, where liberal reforms like the emancipation of the serfs had begun to unravel under the reactionary regime of Alexander III. Repin's painting became a cipher for this national mood, a mirror of the tension between progress and repression, between reform and rage. In his memoirs, Repin described being struck by the sounds of Rimsky-Korsakov's composition, The Sweetness of Vengeance, which stirred something inside him. He wanted to give visual shape to that emotional storm. And what better subject than the most infamous moment of rage in Russian history? His choice of the Ivan and Son narrative was no accident. It allowed him to explore the moment an authoritarian figure realizes, too late, the cost of unchecked power. Ivan's bloodshot eyes, mouth agape in horror, speak to more than just personal guilt. They speak to the agony of a nation that cannot undo its self-inflicted wounds. Repin spent years refining and revisiting his methods as he worked tirelessly on the painting. His attention to detail and historical accuracy went so far as to borrow antique fabrics and objects to ensure authenticity. Yet the result was anything but sterile or academic. The final piece is alive, sad, and full of tension. The son's pallor, the blood dripping down his face, the helpless posture of Ivan IV. All are rendered in excruciating emotional fidelity. Not everyone appreciated this psychological depth. When it was unveiled, the painting sparked immediate controversy. It was hailed by some as a masterpiece of Russian realism, while others thought it was an insult to the monarchy's image, especially in a time when autocratic rule was becoming more prevalent. Upon seeing the painting, Tsar Alexander III reportedly became so disturbed that he prohibited its public display. The ban proved the painting's potency, which was both frustrating and affirming for Repin, who saw art as a form of national conversation. Over time, the artwork became a cultural lightning rod. In 1913, a mentally ill man who claimed the image had caused him too much distress cut it. Repin, though devastated, personally oversaw the restoration. Then in 2018, more than a century after its creation, the painting was attacked again, this time by a man wielding a metal security pole. Though protected by glass, the artwork was damaged. The man later stated that he had consumed vodka and was overcome by the painting's emotional intensity. The piece's continued emotional and psychological power is demonstrated by the recurrent urge to destroy it physically. In addition to the act it portrays and the historical period it references, the painting also tells the story of Repin's own time, the 1880s, when liberal hope clashed with Tsarist regression. Repin captured the larger metaphor of a state killing its own future out of fear, pride, or delusion through Ivan Iv's panicked embrace of his dying son. Ivan's anguish isn't just personal. It's national. He's not just a man who's made a mistake. He's the embodiment of a political system imploding on itself. And that's why the painting remains so controversial and so resonant. It isn't simply a historical recreation. It's a warning. It reminds us what happens when rage overtakes reason, when power becomes paranoia, and when regret comes too late. It is a visual scream that has echoed throughout Russian history for centuries, echoing a pain that cannot be silenced. Repin exposed the intimate consequences of tyranny and the enduring scars of a father's rage through brushstroke and blood. In doing so, he created not just a masterpiece of realist art, but a timeless meditation on violence, sorrow, and the fragile boundary between power and ruin. One of the most controversial paintings ever reveals centuries of blood, rage, and pain. Ilya Repin's Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan, 1885, is one of the few pieces of art to have sparked such outrage, debate, and even physical violence. This harrowing masterpiece depicts Tsar Ivan IV, the Terrible, cradling his dying son, Tsarevich Ivan, after delivering a fatal blow in a fit of rage. The painting is not just a historical scene. It's a mirror of Russia's cyclical trauma, reflecting tyranny, regret, and the destructive consequences of absolute power. The painting's turbulent past is as dramatic as the event it depicts, from being censored by the Tsar to being vandalized twice. Below we explore the actual background to Ivan the Terrible's filicide. How Repin used the painting to critique 19th century Russia. Why it continues to be one of art's most contentious works. The bloody backstory. Did Ivan the Terrible really kill his son? The reign of Russia's most brutal Tsar. Russia's first Tsar, Ivan IV, also known as the Terrible, from Grozny, which means formidable or awe-inspiring, ruled from 1547 to 1584. His reign was marked by military conquests, expanding Russia's territory, paranoia and purges. The Oprichnina, his secret police, executed thousands. Outbursts of violence. He once beat his pregnant wife, resulting in a miscarriage. The death of Tsarevich Ivan, 1581. The most infamous incident of Ivan's reign was the death of his heir, Ivan Ivanovich, in 1581. Accounts vary, but the most accepted version is Ivan saw his daughter-in-law, Elena Sheremeteva, in what he deemed immodest clothing. She was pregnant and resting. He beat her with his staff out of rage, resulting in her miscarriage. When Tsarevich Ivan confronted him, the Tsar struck his son in the head with the same staff. The younger Ivan died 5 days later. Did Ivan regret doing so? Some historians claim Ivan was consumed by guilt, holding his son as he died. Others contend that he never truly repented and maintained his brutal rule. This moment of filicide and remorse became the centerpiece of Repin's painting, but with a deeper political message. Why Repin painted it? A reflection of 19th century Russia. The assassination of Tsar Alexander II, 1881. The painting was started by Repin in 1883, just 2 years after Tsar Alexander II was killed. Alexander II had freed the serfs in 1861. His successor, Alexander III, reversed reforms, ushering in repression. Repin wrote, "I was thinking of the agonizing tragedies of our time. My feelings were too heavy for the horrors of our time." The painting was about more than just Ivan. It was also a warning about the consequences of tyranny. The symbolism in the painting. The blood. The crimson pool beneath Ivan and his son symbolizes Russia's endless cycle of violence. The Tsar's eyes. His wide, horrified gaze shows instant regret, but too late. The son's face. His calm demeanor contrasts with his father's agony, symbolizing power's destruction of innocence. Repin's genius was in showing the moment of realization, not just the act itself. The controversy. Why the painting was banned and attacked. Immediate backlash. 1885. When the painting was first shown in St. Petersburg, reactions were polarized. Leo Tolstoy praised it. The most vile and pathetic murderer. The beautiful mortal beauty of the sun. Tsar Alexander III banned it. He ordered it removed from exhibition, fearing it criticized autocracy. 2 violent attacks on the painting. 1913. A mental health patient used a knife to cut it 3 times. 2018. A drunk vandal smashed it with a metal pole, shouting, "This is a falsehood." The painting's unsettling raw power is demonstrated by both attacks. Legacy. Why this painting still haunts Russia. A warning about absolute power. Repin's work foreshadowed the Russian Revolution, 1917, where another Tsar, Nicholas II, would lose his family to violence. Modern dictators still fear art that exposes tyranny's cost. Cultural impact. As a symbol of father guilt in shows like Daredevil, Born Again, referenced in Russian dissident art opposing Putin's regime. Final thought. A painting that refuses to be silenced. Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan is more than a historical scene. It's a timeless meditation on power's corruption. Repin's brushstrokes capture. When a tyrant realizes his error immediately. Heavy checkmark the blood spilled in the name of control. Heavy checkmark the pain that lingers for centuries. Why does it still provoke rage? Because it holds up a mirror. and some would rather shatter the mirror than face their reflection. The painting survives, restored but unbroken, just like Russia's unresolved history. Whether a simple shortening of someone's given name or a way of describing a person's personality or behavior, nicknames have been a part of cultures all over the world for centuries. And regardless of whether a person is famous or not, a nickname can be kind or mean, funny or serious, obvious or surprising. The historical figures below were tagged with nicknames that ranged from Little Boots and the Green Hornet to the Black Swallow of Death and the Boneless. Of the nicknames listed below, which would you prefer to be remembered by for the rest of time? Simo Häyhä was called White Death because deep snow embankments hid the Finnish sniper's position from enemy soldiers. Photo. Finnish Military Archives Wikimedia Commons Public Domain. 1. Simo Häyhä was called White Death because deep snow embankments hid the Finnish sniper's position from enemy soldiers. Simo Häyhä is considered the deadliest sniper in the history of modern warfare. During the Winter War of 1939 between Finland and the Soviet Union, Häyhä, a Finnish soldier, was said to have single-handedly killed at least 500 Soviet soldiers over a 3-month span. The weather greatly aided Häyhä, as deep snowbanks allowed Häyhä, who would dress in all-white camouflage, to hide his position from enemy troops. The Red Army reportedly gave him the moniker White Death as a result of this, though this may be Finnish propaganda rather than the truth. Another nickname for him was the Magic Sniper. A gunshot wounded Häyhä in the head severely on March 6, 1940. When he was found unconscious, it was thought that he had not survived, and his body was put on top a pile of deceased soldiers. It was only after another soldier saw Häyhä's leg twitching that he realized the sniper was still alive. The bullet had destroyed most of Häyhä's jaw, and although he underwent 26 surgeries, he was left disfigured for the remainder of his life. The Black Swallow of Death was the nickname given to Eugene Bullard, the first African-American pilot of a fighter plane. Eugene Bullard was born in Georgia in 1895, but ran away to Europe at age 12 in an attempt to escape the violent racism he'd witnessed as a child. In 1914, the 19-year-old enlisted in the French Foreign Legion and fought in at least 3 battles in World War I before being wounded. He was awarded the Croix de Guerre for his heroism.